The intellectual giants of ancient Greece. What if I told you that one of humanity's first engineers designed a flying machine more than 2,000 years ago? Sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, right? But the truth is, such an invention did exist, and it came from the mind of Archytas of Tarentum, a forgotten genius from ancient Greece. Long before Leonardo da Vinci sketched his famous flying machines, Archytas created a mechanical bird capable of flight, a device so ahead of its time that many consider it the earliest known attempt at a robotic, autonomous machine. Yet, despite this mind-boggling invention, Archytas' name has been largely left out of modern history books. But who was this man? Why has his legacy been overshadowed by the likes of Plato, Aristotle, and Pythagoras? And most importantly, what other groundbreaking ideas did he leave behind? To truly understand Archytas, we need to step back into the vibrant world of Magna Graecia, the Greek colonies in southern Italy, where intellectual curiosity and innovation flourished. Archytas was more than just an inventor. He was a mathematician, philosopher, statesman, and military leader. He was a man whose intellect stretched across disciplines, blending theory with practical application in a way few could. And yet, for reasons we'll explore, history hasn't been kind to his memory. Biography of a forgotten genius born around 428 BC in the Greek city of Tarentum, modern-day Taranto, Italy. Archytas lived during a time when Greek civilization was experiencing a golden age of thought and discovery. His homeland, part of Magna Graecia, was a region teeming with intellectual and cultural exchange, where the brightest minds from across the Mediterranean converged. Although not much is known about his early life, Archytas is believed to have come from an aristocratic family, which likely gave him access to the best education of the time. Archytas was a student of the Pythagorean school, a philosophical and mathematical sect that sought to explain the universe through numbers and harmony. As a Pythagorean, Archytas believed that mathematics was the key to understanding the natural world, and he applied this belief in all areas of his work. But unlike many of his contemporaries, who were content to theorize from the safety of their lecture halls, Archytas was a man of action. In addition to being a philosopher and mathematician, Archytas was a statesman and military leader. He was elected as the commander-in-chief of Tarentum's army 7 times, an unprecedented achievement in a political system that generally rotated military leadership. His strategic brilliance in battle was matched only by his ability to govern, as he led Tarentum through a period of peace and prosperity. Yet, for all his accomplishments in governance and warfare, it was Archytas' intellectual contributions that set him apart. He wasn't just a thinker, he was a doer. And his creations, like the mechanical pigeon that could fly, exemplify his unique ability to turn theoretical knowledge into tangible innovation. The machines and mechanisms of Archytas. Before we discuss Archytas' innovations, it's important to understand the state of mechanical science in ancient Greece. The Greeks had developed basic principles of mechanics through simple tools and inventions like pulleys, levers, and catapults, mainly for military purposes. However, most mechanical thinking at the time was highly theoretical. The ancient world saw mechanics as a subset of philosophy rather than a practical science and intellectual exercise, if you will. Few thinkers attempted to apply mechanical knowledge to real-world problems. And then, along came Archytas. Unlike his contemporaries, Archytas didn't just ponder mechanical principles, he applied them. As one of the earliest thinkers to bridge the gap between mathematics and mechanics, Archytas had a unique vision of how machines could work. He wasn't content with just understanding theoretical principles. He wanted to see them in action. One of Archytas' most remarkable contributions was his work on the concept of motion. While he didn't have the language of modern physics, Archytas was, in many ways, a precursor to Isaac Newton. He explored ideas about force, motion, and the relationship between the two, which were groundbreaking for his time. He developed early theories on how objects move, laying the groundwork for what would later be formalized as mechanics. For instance, Archytas believed that motion could not be separated from the force that causes it, an idea that would later be echoed in Newton's first law of motion, inertia. In fact, his mechanical ideas were so advanced that some historians argue he may have come close to discovering key principles of dynamics. Although ancient Greece lacked the experimental tools to formalize these ideas, Archytas used geometry and ratios to explore the behavior of objects in motion. His interest in the mathematical relationships governing movement wasn't just theoretical, he applied it to real-world mechanical designs. One area where Archytas' practical ingenuity really shone was in his use of simple machines like pulleys and levers. These devices, which multiply force and make it easier to move heavy objects, have been known for some time. However, Archytas didn't just use them, he refined and expanded their applications. He recognized that pulleys and levers were not just tools for lifting heavy stones or building temples, but essential components for more complex machinery. His understanding of how these devices worked allowed him to construct more sophisticated mechanical systems, such as advanced catapults used for defense during military campaigns. For instance, Archytas applied his understanding of levers to military siege engines, improving their effectiveness and making them a staple of Greek warfare. He also reportedly used pulleys to solve logistical problems, making it easier to transport large supplies and war materials. In a sense, Archytas was an early architect of military logistics, someone who could not only win battles, but also ensure that armies had the tools they needed to succeed. Imagine the ancient Greek soldiers watching Archytas demonstrate his new pulley system. They probably thought, "We just asked for a way to lift some stones, and now we have an engineering lecture. Is this guy for real?" Archytas was also one of the first thinkers to systematically apply mathematics to mechanics, making him a pioneer in the field of what we now call engineering science. For Archytas, mathematics wasn't just a tool for solving abstract problems. It was the key to unlocking the mysteries of the physical world. He used geometry to explain mechanical phenomena and created mathematical models for understanding the motion of objects and the operation of simple machines. One of his most famous innovations was applying geometric ratios to understand the mechanics of pulley systems. Through his calculations, Archytas was able to optimize mechanical devices for specific purposes, whether for lifting heavy objects or launching projectiles. This mathematical approach allowed Archytas to take mechanics to a level of precision that had never been seen before. He was not simply guessing at how machines should work. He was calculating their efficiency and effectiveness based on geometric principles. In many ways, Archytas' use of mathematics and mechanics foreshadowed the later work of engineers like Leonardo da Vinci and even Isaac Newton, who used mathematics to explain the physical world in exact terms. You can almost picture Archytas standing in front of a classroom of skeptical ancient Greeks, trying to explain his geometric formulas for pulleys. "Just trust me," he'd say, "this triangle will help you lift the rock." Archytas' genius wasn't just in his ability to theorize, but in his insistence on practical application. He didn't merely discuss ideas, he built machines. His mechanical devices weren't just concepts on a scroll, but tangible, working creations that could be used in everyday life. This sets him apart from many ancient thinkers who saw theory and practice as distinct fields. His ability to take the abstract and make it practical is perhaps best illustrated by the next topic we'll explore: his pigeon or flying mechanical bird. This was no philosophical speculation, it was a real, functioning device that astonished those who witnessed it. Archytas' approach combined the precision of mathematics with the tangible utility of mechanics, demonstrating that the two were not mutually exclusive, but complementary. Archytas' contributions to the development of mechanical science were immense. He not only anticipated many of the principles that would be central to modern physics, but also applied his knowledge to create devices that were practical and, in some cases, centuries ahead of their time. Inventions of Archytas, a pioneer of aviation? It sounds like something from a Jules Verne novel, but Archytas is credited with creating what may be the first recorded instance of a flying machine. This was not some mystical device from a legend, but a real mechanical bird commonly referred to as the pigeon that could actually take flight. Built in the 4th century BCE, this device is believed to have been powered by a form of steam or compressed air, making it one of the earliest known examples of an autonomous, man-made object capable of sustained movement. Now, you might be asking, how could something like this even be possible in ancient Greece? The technology that Archytas used is still somewhat mysterious, as detailed descriptions of the pigeon are scarce. However, most historians believe it worked by harnessing air pressure. The mechanical bird likely had a hollow body, possibly made of wood or bronze, into which compressed air was forced. When released, the force of the air propelled the bird forward, allowing it to glide through the air for short distances. While this invention wasn't exactly capable of sustained flight like a modern airplane, it was an astonishing leap forward in mechanical science and early attempt to understand the principles of aerodynamics and propulsion. The idea of a self-moving machine wasn't just a whimsical notion for Archytas. It was a practical demonstration of his deep understanding of physics and mechanics. Imagine the amazement of the ancient Greeks who witnessed the pigeon in action. They probably thought, if this guy can make birds fly, what's next? Mechanical horses. So, how exactly did this pigeon work? While we don't have a fully detailed account, historians believe Archytas was utilizing the principles of pneumatics, the science of using air pressure to produce motion. This technology was rudimentary compared to modern pneumatics, but the basic principles were the same. The bird was likely hollow, with a compartment for air storage, and may have used valves to control the release of compressed air. When the air was released, it provided enough thrust to propel the bird into the air, much like a rocket or jet engine today, albeit on a much smaller scale. This invention demonstrates not only Archytas' understanding of mechanics but also his innovative spirit. He was essentially experimenting with concepts of robotics and automation long before such ideas became mainstream. Archytas' pigeon can be seen as a precursor to modern-day drones or even early rockets, proving that the ancient world was far more technologically advanced than we often give it credit for. Archytas didn't stop with the mechanical pigeon. He reportedly designed several other machines, each showcasing his ability to combine theoretical knowledge with practical application. While none of these devices survive today, historical accounts suggest that Archytas was particularly interested in automation, the idea that machines could perform tasks without direct human intervention. Some sources credit Archytas with the creation of simple automata mechanical devices that could perform repetitive motions, like walking or moving objects. These early robots were not complex by modern standards, but they were revolutionary at the time. In a world where everything was powered by human or animal labor, the idea of a machine that could move on its own was nothing short of magical. Though we may not know the exact details of these devices, Archytas' work in this area laid the groundwork for future inventors, such as Heron of Alexandria, who would later develop more sophisticated automata and mechanical toys. Archytas' ability to imagine machines that moved on their own foreshadows the mechanical inventions of the Renaissance and even the Industrial Revolution. While the mechanical pigeon wasn't exactly a modern drone, it can be seen as a significant step in the early history of aeronautics. Archytas was one of the first thinkers to consider the idea of powered flight, experimenting with principles that wouldn't be fully understood until many centuries later. His work suggests that ancient thinkers were not only capable of understanding advanced mechanical concepts, but were also willing to push the boundaries of what was technologically possible. In this sense, Archytas was a visionary, a precursor to figures like Leonardo da Vinci, who would later sketch flying machines based on similar principles of aerodynamics. Of course, it would take many centuries before powered flight became a reality. But the fact that Archytas was already thinking about and experimenting with flight in the 4th century BC is remarkable. It shows that the desire to explore the skies is as old as civilization itself, and Archytas may well have been the first to seriously explore how it could be done. Archytas' innovations didn't stop with his lifetime. While his name might not be as well known as Plato or Aristotle, his mechanical creations and mathematical theories influenced thinkers long after his death. In fact, his work inspired later inventors in the Hellenistic period and the Roman Empire, particularly in the field of mechanics and automata. Herod of Alexandria, for example, built upon Archytas' ideas to create his famous automaton, the world's first robot, as well as early versions of steam engines and mechanical toys. In some ways, Heron's achievements were a direct continuation of Archytas' vision, proving that his influence extended far beyond his lifetime. Moreover, the Pigeon and other inventions set the stage for future technological developments in the fields of aerodynamics and robotics. The principles that Archytas explored would later be critical in the development of everything from the steam engine to modern aviation. While the ancient world didn't have the resources or technology to fully realize Archytas' vision, his ideas laid the groundwork for centuries of innovation. Mathematician and Philosopher, one of Archytas' most significant contributions to mathematics was his work on the relationship between numbers and music. He wasn't just a mathematician in the sense we understand today, he was also deeply interested in the connection between mathematics, music, and the natural world. Following in the footsteps of Pythagoras, Archytas expanded on the idea that musical harmony is governed by numerical ratios. To understand this better, let's step into the ancient mindset. The Greeks believed that the universe itself operated according to harmonious, mathematical principles. Music, with its pleasing intervals and scales, was seen as a reflection of this cosmic order. Archytas worked extensively on what we now call the theory of proportions, especially focusing on how specific mathematical ratios produce musical harmony. He is credited with the discovery of the harmonic mean, a mathematical concept that was revolutionary for understanding musical intervals. He investigated how string lengths, when divided by simple ratios, produce harmonious sounds. For instance, a string divided into a 2-to-1 ratio produces an octave, while a 3-to-2 ratio gives a perfect fifth, one of the most fundamental intervals in Western music. Archytas wasn't just interested in these ratios for their mathematical beauty, he believed they reflected a deeper order in nature itself. His work on harmonics demonstrated that there was an underlying mathematical structure to the world, one that could be both heard and understood through numbers. Imagine ancient philosophers having a jam session where instead of guitars, they're playing with numbers. Wait, let me adjust this ratio, this is going to sound amazing. Archytas' most famous mathematical achievement was his solution to the problem of doubling the cube, a classic problem of Greek geometry. The challenge, which originated in a story involving the Oracle of Delphi, asked mathematicians to construct a cube with twice the volume of a given cube using only a compass and straightedge. For centuries, Greek mathematicians have been stumped by this puzzle. Archytas approached the problem with his characteristic blend of creativity and rigor. His solution was ingenious and relied on three-dimensional geometry, a major leap forward for his time. Rather than attempting to solve the problem purely through two-dimensional plane geometry, Archytas introduced a spatial approach. He essentially constructed a geometric figure in three-dimensional space that allowed him to find the correct proportional relationship between the sides of the original cube and the doubled cube. Archytas' method was a precursor to modern analytic geometry, where shapes and equations can be understood in multiple dimensions. His use of spatial reasoning was a breakthrough, allowing him to solve a problem that had baffled mathematicians for generations. While we now know that it's impossible to solve the problem of doubling the cube using just a compass and straight edge, Archytas' attempt was nothing short of revolutionary. His work on this problem not only contributed to geometry, but also helped advance the understanding of mathematical reasoning in three dimensions. Although Archytas is best remembered for his mathematical and mechanical genius, he was also deeply engaged in philosophy, especially in the realm of ethics and governance. As a leader of the Pythagorean school, he was interested in how philosophical principles could guide not only personal conduct, but also the governance of society. Archytas believed that knowledge should serve the public good and that true wisdom lay in balancing theory with practical action. His philosophy was centered on the idea of rational governance. He saw the state as a kind of mechanical system, one that could be guided by logic and reason, much like the machines he designed. He believed that a ruler, like an engineer, should understand the mechanics of society and govern with a sense of justice and rationality. His own political career in Tarentum was a testament to this philosophy. Archytas wasn't just a thinker, he was a statesman who practiced what he preached, leading his city through periods of peace and prosperity. Archytas' ideas on the connection between morality and knowledge had a profound influence on his contemporaries. He is known to have been a close friend of Plato, who greatly admired his ability to combine philosophical thought with practical leadership. In fact, legend has it that Archytas once saved Plato from a shipwreck, securing his place not just in intellectual history, but in the realm of legendary anecdotes as well. His philosophical ideas laid the groundwork for later thinkers who saw knowledge as the foundation for ethical governance. Archytas believed that a ruler must be both wise and just, using logic to create laws that serve the best interests of the people. His blend of ethical philosophy and practical governance foreshadowed the later Stoic philosophers, who would emphasize reason and virtue as the cornerstones of a well-ordered life. If Plato ever got into a debate about who was the better philosopher, Archytas could always say, "Hey, I saved your life, so maybe I win this round." In addition to his personal achievements in leadership, Archytas wrote extensively about political philosophy, focusing on the role of education and knowledge in statecraft. He believed that only those who had mastered the sciences and arts were truly fit to govern. For Archytas, governance was not a skill that could be picked up on the fly. It required deep study and understanding, much like engineering or mathematics. He argued that leaders should be chosen based on their ability to apply rational principles to real-world problems, much like how an engineer would design a machine. This was a radical idea in a world where power often passed through birthright or military conquest. Archytas proposed that society could function better if those in power were philosopher kings, a notion later echoed by Plato in his own works. In this way, Archytas' political philosophy bridged the gap between intellectual theory and practical governance, making him one of the earliest advocates for meritocratic leadership. His ideas about the role of knowledge in politics would influence generations of thinkers, laying the foundation for later debates on the ideal forms of government. While the term Renaissance man is usually reserved for polymaths of the European Renaissance, Archytas fits the description centuries earlier. He was a mathematician, philosopher, engineer, general, and statesman, roles that rarely, if ever, combine in a single person in the ancient world. Archytas represents the ideal of the learned individual who uses their knowledge across multiple domains to improve the world around them. His contributions to mathematics, philosophy, and mechanics were not isolated achievements, but were interconnected in his vision of a rational, orderly universe where knowledge could be applied to better society. Archytas' ability to move seamlessly between different disciplines speaks to the breadth of his intellect and his lasting influence on both science and philosophy. His influence reached far beyond his own time, inspiring later philosophers, scientists, and even political leaders. His idea that knowledge and morality were intrinsically linked became a guiding principle for many thinkers throughout history. Archytas may not be as well known today as some of his contemporaries, but his legacy is profound. His insights and inventions helped shape the intellectual foundations of the Western world, influencing everything from mathematics to political theory. The forgotten engineer, despite his incredible achievements, Archytas' name has largely been lost to the sands of time. So, how did such a towering figure in mathematics, philosophy, and engineering come to be forgotten? The first and most obvious answer lies in the fragile nature of historical preservation. In ancient Greece, much of what we know about intellectual figures comes from written texts. However, the works of Archytas have not survived in their entirety. While we know from secondary sources that he wrote extensively on mathematics, mechanics, and ethics, only fragments of his writings have come down to us. Many of his works likely perished in the same way that countless other ancient manuscripts did, lost to fire, decay, or simply the shifting priorities of later generations. For much of history, only a handful of references to Archytas have survived in the writings of later philosophers and historians. This lack of original sources has contributed to his obscurity. Unlike Plato or Aristotle, whose works were meticulously copied and preserved over the centuries, Archytas' ideas were often transmitted indirectly through the writings of others. Another reason for Archytas' relative obscurity is that he was somewhat overshadowed by more famous contemporaries, particularly Plato and Aristotle. Although Archytas was an intellectual equal to Plato and in some areas, arguably his superior history tends to remember those who write the narratives. Plato, with his prolific writings and the later establishment of the Academy, became one of the central figures of Western philosophy. Aristotle, as Plato's student and eventual rival, further cemented his place in intellectual history by founding his own school, the Lyceum, and producing a vast body of work. In contrast, Archytas, while highly respected during his life, didn't establish a school that would continue his teachings in the same way. He focused more on practical governance and military affairs, and while he made incredible contributions to several fields, his intellectual legacy was less institutionalized than that of Plato or Aristotle. The intellectual currents of the time also played a role in why Archytas' contributions were sidelined. After the death of Socrates, the philosophical world became deeply influenced by the metaphysical debates initiated by Plato and carried forward by Aristotle. The focus of philosophical inquiry shifted from the more practical and scientific pursuits of figures like Archytas to the abstract realms of metaphysics and ethics. Aristotle, in particular, left a significant mark on future generations by organizing knowledge into clear disciplines: physics, metaphysics, biology, ethics, and politics. His methodical approach to categorizing knowledge helped shape the way Western thought developed, and this structure left little room for thinkers who straddled multiple fields, as Archytas did. Moreover, while Archytas' work in mathematics and mechanics laid essential foundations, his contributions were not as easily incorporated into the grand philosophical systems that dominated the ancient world after his time. His multidisciplinary approach was difficult to categorize, and as a result, his innovations were not preserved in the same systematic way as those of Aristotle or Plato. Despite his historical obscurity, modern scholars have rediscovered the genius of Archytas, and his contributions are now being re-evaluated with the respect they deserve. Historians of mathematics, philosophy, and science have begun to recognize that Archytas was not just a marginal figure in ancient Greece, but a pivotal thinker who anticipated ideas that would shape the course of Western intellectual history. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as scholars began to delve deeper into the history of Greek mathematics, Archytas' name resurfaced as they studied ancient sources that mentioned his achievements. Mathematicians were particularly impressed by his work on proportions and his solution to the problem of doubling the cube, concepts that foreshadowed later developments in geometry and algebra. Engineers, too, have found inspiration in Archytas' mechanical inventions, particularly his work on the mechanical pigeon. The fact that an ancient thinker was able to conceptualize and build a flying device has intrigued those interested in the history of robotics and aeronautics. The mechanical pigeon, while primitive by today's standards, represents one of the earliest examples of autonomous machines, a precursor to modern robotics. Philosophers, likewise, have revisited Archytas' moral and political thought, particularly his views on rational governance and the role of knowledge in leadership. As modern societies grapple with issues of ethics and governance and the application of scientific knowledge to public policy, Archytas' ideas seem more relevant than ever. Today, Archytas is celebrated as a forgotten genius whose work anticipated many of the breakthroughs that would later revolutionize the world. His contributions to mechanical science, mathematics, and philosophy laid the groundwork for future generations of thinkers and inventors. In many ways, Archytas can be seen as an early engineer thinker who combined theoretical knowledge with practical application. His mechanical innovations, like the pigeon, were not just abstract experiments, but real-world applications of his mathematical and scientific knowledge. This approach resonates with the modern spirit of engineering, where theory and practice go hand in hand. Moreover, Archytas' interdisciplinary approach, his ability to move between philosophy, mathematics, and engineering reflects a mindset that is highly valued in today's world. In an era where specialization often leads to siloed thinking, Archytas' ability to see the connections between different fields serves as an inspiration for modern thinkers who strive to integrate knowledge across disciplines. His rediscovery has also sparked a broader appreciation for the many lost figures of ancient history, those whose work may not have survived intact, but whose ideas continue to influence us in ways we are only beginning to understand. Maybe one day Archytas will get the recognition he deserves, and his name will appear in the same breath as Plato and Aristotle. Perhaps a statue of a mechanical pigeon should be erected in his honor. Final thoughts. Archytas of Tarentum may not be a household name today, but his genius undoubtedly left an indelible mark on the world. From his groundbreaking work in mathematics and mechanics to his pioneering ideas in philosophy and governance, Archytas was a true polymath, an ancient visionary whose innovations and intellectual contributions were far ahead of his time. Whether through his mechanical pigeon, his solution to the geometrical puzzle of doubling the cube, or his belief in rational governance, Archytas lived at the intersection of theory and practice. His legacy continues to inspire, even as it is gradually rediscovered by modern scholars. His story also serves as a reminder of how fragile history can be, how easily brilliant minds can be forgotten only to be rediscovered centuries later. Today, as we look to the future of technology, robotics, and ethics and governance, Archytas' insights still resonate. He was a thinker who believed in the power of knowledge to better society, and in that sense, his legacy is timeless. But what do you think? Should Archytas be given more recognition as one of the great thinkers of the ancient world? What part of his story surprised or fascinated you the most? Let us know your thoughts. Perhaps it's time for the world to once again celebrate the genius of Archytas.
By my side, intense, strong, no fear to face, nowhere to hide. Intense. I subscribe to this channel, click like today, because content like this just lights my way. Intense and slow.